What's up guys, welcome back to part 2 of the Cold War by OverSimplified. I really enjoyed part 1, these oversimplified videos are absolutely insane, a huge knowledge dump, and I really don't know much about the Cold War or any of these videos I've done so far, so it's awesome. I'm learning, potentially some of you guys don't know about it either, so we can learn together. And if you do know, let me know in the comments if anything needs correcting, if you want to just add general information or answer any of my questions, I'd really appreciate that. Now we left part 1 with tensions high. The US, which owned, at the time, they were in control of West Berlin. The Soviet Union in control of East Berlin. They had massive confrontation at the Berlin Wall where potentially, shots almost got fired. Atomic bombs almost got sent. But inch by inch, they called each other and pulled away. The tensions relieved a little bit. Let's get straight into part 2. I have honestly no clue what to expect. Potentially the space stuff may come into it on this one because I know a little bit about that. But other than that, I'm not sure. Let's get straight into it, guys. Hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. Subscribe if you're new. And let's see what we got. OverSimplified Part 2, The Cold War.
This video was made possible by Skillshare, an online learning community where you can learn just about anything. Support my channel by signing up using the link below and get your first 2 months for free.
Awesome.
For anyone who thinks recent US history has never been as crazy as it is right now, allow me to present to you the 1960s. Extreme cultural division, major political assassinations, and the closest the world has ever come to nuclear apocalypse. Shocked by the CIA's intrusive methods for putting down socialism in Latin America, a certain Fidel Castro met with a certain Che Guevara in a bar in Mexico City, and the two of them decided they should grow some awesome beards and overthrow the Cuban government, which is exactly what they did. Cuba had been America's summer playground, and America didn't like seeing a communist regime being set up in its own backyard. So the US immediately began training up Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. However, as the day of the operation came closer, Kennedy wanted to conceal any US involvement in the plan. So he massively scaled back American air support, and as a result, the Bay of Pigs invasion was a humiliating defeat for America. But Castro felt there was still an impending US threat to his regime. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Khrushchev had a lot of medium-range nuclear missiles that couldn't reach America, but
just a few, you know. As you do, you just got a few nuclear missiles hanging about.
They could if they were positioned, say, on an exotic Caribbean island off the coast of Florida. Hey, I'm a communist who hates America. You're a communist who hates America. You know what that means? We should fall in love. I was just going to suggest you set your missiles up in Cuba. Oh, no, you're right. That's a better idea. Be still, my beating heart. On October 14th, 1962, a U-2 spy plane over Cuba noticed something strange. Sir, you need to look at this photograph. You're right. That's the cutest dog I've ever seen. Sir, I was referring more to the Soviet missiles. America freaked out as they realized what was going on. They were completely vulnerable, and they had to act fast. They knew that airstrikes or an invasion of Cuba would likely mean nuclear war with the Soviet Union. So Kennedy came up with another idea, a blockade. The US Navy announced it would stop and search any Soviet ships heading to Cuba, and would sink any that did not comply. In response, the Soviet put its military into full combat readiness. The US did the same, and began drawing up plans for an attack on Cuba. Things were escalating fast, and both superpowers were getting ready for World War III. Emergency communications between the two sides broke down as Khrushchev rejected Kennedy's demands for the missiles to be removed. And for the first time in history, US Strategic Air Command moved to DEFCON 2. DEFCON 1 means nuclear war.
Holy, it got that intense, man. Yeah, that's scary stuff. We potentially may not have been here today if that had got to DEFCON 1. Obviously it doesn't. We don't want nuclear war, but holy, it got that close, man.
Soviets shot down a U-2 spy plane over Cuba. A Soviet nuclear submarine in the Caribbean mistakenly believed war had already broken out, and 2 of the senior officers gave the go-ahead to fire its nuclear torpedo. Thankfully, the 3rd senior officer, this beautiful man, refused to authorize the decision. The US finalized its preparations, and I kid you not, the day before the US were set to decide the day and time for the Cuban invasion, Khrushchev was like, hey, you know if you just removed your missiles from Turkey, we'd remove ours from Cuba? Yeah, that sounds good to me. It was a bit more complicated than that, but at the last second, the two sides finally came to an agreement. Soviet missiles were shipped out of Cuba, and the world breathed one gigantic sigh of relief. Except for one guy, who was bloody livid. Phew! Let's hope that's the biggest crisis of my presidency. Unfortunately for him, his presidency was to end with one. Having nearly blown up the planet, a few changes were made. First, the superpowers agreed to a limited test ban treaty. Secondly, the Soviets ousted Khrushchev and replaced him with Leonid Brezhnev, who was a kisser. He liked to kiss. Both sides were deeply concerned
Fair play to him. Each of their own. If you like to do it, you like to do
The
it.
prospect of nuclear war. But still, the arms race raged on throughout the 60s and 70s. US intelligence worked out that the Soviets' nuclear arsenal was not as powerful as they previously thought, but in fact, it was America that held the advantage. ABMs and MIRVs were developed, and the doctrine of MAD. If both sides knew they would be completely destroyed by a nuclear war, neither would risk starting one. But even without war, the world was already feeling the effects of nuclear weapons. In 1966, above the pleasant town of Palomares in Spain, a US bomber collided with a tanker mid-air, and 4 hydrogen bombs fell and landed near the town below. It hasn't exploded, so I'm sure everything's fine. Whoa, boy. Hey, I wouldn't eat that if I were you. Okay. What were you gonna do today? Go for a swim? Yeah, I wouldn't. Are you breathing right now? Yeah? Yeah.
Not for long.
It took the Americans 2.5 months to find one of the bombs, which had gone missing in the ocean. This was the 14th time America had lost a nuclear bomb since 1950. 14. Nobody knows how many bombs the Soviet Union lost. So sleep well tonight. After Kennedy's assassination, Vice President Lyndon B Johnson took over, and he inherited a developing crisis.
Yeah, he got assassinated. I don't really know too much about it. I had heard about that, which is obviously tragic. I'm surprised it brushes over it. It really does brush over it.
After Kennedy's assassination,
Yeah, it kind of just pushes over it. I guess it's about the Cold War, not really that. If you guys want to add more insight on that, because I do know a little bit about it. I do remember learning about it in school. But again, apologies for my ignorance. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But he pushes over it a little bit. Maybe you'll go back to it or not. But let's carry on. I'm enjoying this video.
Vice President Lyndon B Johnson took over, and he inherited a developing crisis in the East. Vietnam. Back in the 50s, the Vietnamese had kicked their French colonizers out once and for all, and the country was divided into two. In the north, a communist regime, and in the south, an anti-communist regime.
Yeah.
Both were led by very sweet-looking old men, but don't let that deceive you. They were both ruthless dictators, and both dreamed of reuniting Vietnam under their own regime. So the north established the National Liberation Front, also known as the Viet Cong, to carry out a campaign of guerrilla warfare in the south with Soviet support. The US sent advisors to help train the South Vietnamese to deal with the threat, but President Diem's brutal policies pushed more and more South Vietnamese to support the Viet Cong. And over the next decade, the situation escalated to a breaking point. America feared the domino effect. That is, if South Vietnam fell to communism, would Cambodia be next? Then Laos? Thailand? Burma? India? LBJ had to make a choice between losing South Vietnam or sending in the troops. And so in they went. From 1965, America found itself in a war unlike anything it had ever fought before. Let's play Spot the Viet Cong Soldier.
Oh, I've actually got to try and... I kind of want to spot him. I kind of want to. We'll give it 5 more seconds. Oh, where the hell is it? Oh, man. It's going to be fuming. Oh, no. That's not him, is it?
Diem? Of course not. That's because millions of young American men
were
drafted
and
sent to fight a ruthless enemy who used the thick jungle as its shield. It was nearly impossible to tell where the enemy was, or worse, who it was. And as a result, the civilian population got caught up in the brutal crossfire. The city of Saigon found itself under regular attack, and America launched a bombing campaign in the north during Operation Rolling Thunder. The Viet Cong used the Ho Chi Minh Trail running through Laos and Cambodia to supply the campaign. It was a long and brutal war, and I could never do it justice in this video. But in terms of the Cold War, Vietnam was probably the biggest of many, many global conflicts that signaled a turning point.
Wow.
Under the threat of nuclear war, the two superpowers began working to make their relationship more constructive, and as a result, their ideological battle shifted away from the potential of direct conflict and more towards attempting to influence smaller proxy wars around the world. In the Middle East, the Soviet Union provided aid against Israel during the Six-Day War, and then again when the US backed Israel during the Yom Kippur War. In Africa, the Angolan Civil War saw US-supported South Africans fighting Soviet-supported Cubans. In the conflict between Somalia and Ethiopia, the superpowers interestingly switched sides as regimes changed, and the US continued fighting the spread of communism in its own backyard, funding the famous Contra groups to fight the socialist junta in Nicaragua. These proxy wars were fierce enough to begin with, but superpower intervention amplified the destruction and created alarming levels of human suffering throughout the Third World. And in Vietnam, that
Holy, by the way, the fact that they, just because of their main war, because of dominance, because they don't want nuclear, because that just ends the world pretty much. They're getting involved in so many of these different wars. I mean, it was horrible that the wars were taking place anyway, but it's also escalated the amount of deaths, which was not necessarily one bit. Holy, man, I did not realise it was as involved in this in the entire world. I thought US, Soviet Union, that's all I knew. But damn, They really wanted to one-up each other all over the place and were fighting every little battle they could. Holy man.
Human suffering was all being broadcast back home via good old television. Going into the late 60s, America was a changing nation. This became this. This became this. And this became this. The new slogan that was taking root: make love, not war. The majority of Americans did not approve of Johnson's handling of the Vietnam War, and in 1968, a silent majority elected law and order candidate Richard Nixon. As the Vietnam War appeared to be increasingly unwinnable, and public opinion turning increasingly sour, Nixon made the decision to begin bringing the troops home, and ended U.S. involvement in Vietnam by 1973. 2 years later, the South fell. The Cold War was now taking its toll on both superpowers. In Russia, a huge percentage of the budget was still going to the military. People were still hungry, and they just didn't have access to the same lifestyle and goods as the West. And what did they have to show for it? They weren't even winning the space race anymore. Both sides needed to reduce spending in order to rescue their economies, and so both welcomed with open arms an easing of hostilities, otherwise known as détente. To improve relations, Nixon became the first U.S. president to visit Moscow in 1972, and Brezhnev returned the gesture a year later. A number of treaties were signed, including the 1972 SALT Agreement that limited nuclear weapons. Relations with China were even improving via ping-pong diplomacy when the U.S. table tennis team went on a tour of the People's Republic. However, internally, China was still pushing anti-capitalist propaganda, which led to some mixed messages. Nixon even visited China in 1972, and it was a barrel of laughs.
Today, the president walks among priceless treasures from China's golden age. Among them, a pair of ear stoppers used by the emperor to keep from hearing criticism.
Put the stopper into his ears so that he couldn't hear the criticism.
Oh, wow. That's awesome, man. What a baller.
Everything was going great for Nixon, until it was uncovered that back home he was being a very naughty boy and violating constitutional protocol. I'm announcing today my resignation as president, and I'm passing the office to my vice president, Gerald Ford.
Well, let me know if that's ever happened in the past before, someone resigning as president. Let me know. I'd appreciate that. It doesn't seem like it'd happen often. I suppose people potentially have broke the rules without people knowing, but resigning? Has that ever happened? Let me know.
Wow, you mean in America the people can actually remove their leader when he breaks the law? Why not just rule by force? Where's the corruption?
Okay, the people removed him, he didn't just resign. Let me know, I may have got that one wrong.
And my first act as president is to pardon Nixon. Ah, there it is. After the whole fiasco, Americans decided what they really wanted was just a nice, safe guy who wouldn't cheat on them. So they elected Jimmy Carter, and the two sides met in Vienna, where they signed yet another strategic arms limitation treaty. It's an honor, Premier Brezhnev. Likewise, President Carter. Please don't do that. But that's not to say there was no longer any tension between the two sides, because there was. Heaps of it. Once again, the Soviet Union put down further attempts at reform and rebellion in the Eastern Bloc. The Euro missile crisis saw new and improved classes of intermediate-range missiles being deployed in Europe. In 1979, the Soviets thought it would be a good idea if they had their own Vietnam and invaded Afghanistan to prevent a US-sponsored Islamic insurgency. And in response to these various crises, Olympic Games were boycotted. Conservatives were concerned that US policy had become too soft. And in 1980, they decided they wanted a president who would be tough on communism, so they elected Ronald Reagan. And Reagan came in guns blazing. Concerned at the Soviet Union's human rights violations, he made a speech calling them an evil empire. And he also wanted to renew the arms race using technological advances in computing and lasers. He came up with the Space Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars, which was basically a big defensive anti-nuke shield around the country. But a lot of people thought it was a pretty dumb idea.
And as is pretty much impossible. Let me know if that's possible. To be fair, when he says a nuke shield, not a literal shield, when I thought about it, I thought, you know, like you've got in Star Wars with a Death Star or something like that, and it puts a massive shield around it. Obviously not that. I don't know why I thought that at first, but I assume with anti-nuke missiles and stuff like that around the whole states. Is that what it would be? Let me know in the comments, I'd imagine, but that is expensive and unrealistic, 100%. But it's mad that they go from extreme to soft to extreme again. They just can't get anything in the middle. It's hard, you know, it is very hard, because end of the day you've got a huge population, and to vote someone in decisively who's going to fit the bill perfectly is going to be extremely hard because of your opinions. So wow, it's heating up.
Soviet Union perceived this shift in rhetoric as the USA getting ready for war, and they were feeling especially threatened as their relationship with their communist ally China had broken down. Relations took a big hit in 1983 when the Soviets shot down a Korean airliner that had strayed into their airspace, and it looked like the world was going right back to mid-20th century Cold War tension. But then Brezhnev got really old and died, and was replaced by this guy who was really old and died, and was replaced by this guy who was really old and died, and he was replaced by Mikhail Gorbachev. Coming into office in 1984, 1985, he was the real game changer. His
1985?
philosophy differed a lot
Wow.
from previous Soviet leaders. He felt that the reason the Soviet system and economy was struggling was that it didn't allow the Soviet people to find satisfaction in their work, because they weren't allowed to speak freely and lived in fear. Gorbachev wanted the Soviet people to be happy, but unlike previous Soviet leaders, he actually made the change happen. Within the first couple of years, he began the political movement for more openness and transparency, and the restructuring of the Soviet political and economic systems. And change very quickly took effect. People could criticize the government, they could enjoy Western pop culture, the media interviewed Margaret Thatcher, but most importantly, the Soviet people could now enjoy Pizza Hut. All hail to Gorbachev. He also knew that the arms race needed to end in order to rescue the Soviet economy, and a positive relationship with the West must be established. Constructive dialogue reopened and resulted in the INF Treaty, which saw all intermediate-range missiles eliminated, which was huge. Reagan's tone towards the Soviet Union began to soften, and things were looking up. But what would these reforms mean for the Eastern Bloc? For decades, the Soviets had been brutally suppressing any attempt at change. Now, would they be allowed? And that was the exact question on Hungary's lips when the Prime Minister visited Moscow. Gorbachev's response: he didn't necessarily agree with the reforms, but he wouldn't stop them either. He was prepared to let the Eastern Bloc choose its own future.
That's
this
awesome.
was massive, and the
I like
Hungarian
that.
leaders began planning free, multi-party elections. Poland followed suit and also held elections in June. The anti-Soviet party Solidarity won 99 out of 100 seats in the Senate. But not just that. In Hungary, the barbed wire border between East and West was removed. The Iron Curtain was unraveling. But not all Eastern Bloc leaders were happy. Notably, East Germany was still ruled by a hardline Stalinist, Erich Honecker, and many East Germans were still eager to get out. They had been trapped by the Berlin Wall, but now they were doing the math. If they could travel to Hungary, and Hungary's border with the West was loosening, could they now make it to the West? That summer, East Germans decided Hungary was the latest top holiday destination. They traveled there in droves, and using various methods, tens of thousands crossed the border into Austria and the West. Honecker was furious, and blocked travel to Hungary, but that civil liberties train had started rolling, and it wasn't stopping. Thousands more flocked to the West German embassy in Prague, where they stormed the fence around the embassy gardens, and a temporary refugee camp was set up. In September, deals were struck to allow the refugees to travel west via train. Back in East Germany, the people were running on a civil liberties high, and they wanted their next hit.
Before we carry on, I just want to say as well, I can't imagine being put in a situation where it's that dire, that awful, and there's a wall stopping you from going to a better life, that you've got to flee as fast, as dangerous as possible. You know what I mean? It's dangerous, but that means the more dangerous it is, the potential, the quicker you get there, potential of actually doing it. It's madness. It's absolutely awful to hear. It really is. I mean, amazing for ones who made it, but you shouldn't have to go through that in life. And I understand it's still happening in parts of the world to this day. And it is awful. And hopefully one day we'll get to a stage, I don't know if we ever will or not, but hopefully one day everyone can be happy. Everyone can have a life which at least isn't awful, being controlled. You know what I mean? I guess I may have butchered what I'm trying to get across here, but I think you may know what I mean. It's just awful to see, man. The fact that you push to your limits that much, you have to flee a place. It is awful, man.
Dissent was growing. Over time, demonstrations turned to mass protest, with plainclothes secret police officers doing their best to put down the dissent, but it had grown well out of their control. And worse, the biggest demonstration was yet to come. We're gonna put all of this down by force. Right, guys?
Bad idea, man.
Unfortunately, everyone had realized what he had not. This was bigger than them, and the entire East German Politburo voted him out of power. On November 4th, over 500,000 East Germans took to the streets of East Berlin. For many, there was still one big target left in their sights: that damn wall. The pressure on the East German government was too great, and on November 9th, they made a bit of a chaotic announcement that the travel ban between East and West was being lifted. The change wasn't meant to take effect until the next day, and crossing guards still had orders to shoot on sight any who tried to cross. But that night, huge crowds gathered at the crossing points, and the guards were overwhelmed. In an astronomically historic moment, after decades of family separation and travel restriction, the people were allowed to pass
Awesome,
through.
man. That is
East
awesome.
and West Berliners couldn't believe it and celebrated together throughout the night.
Wow.
Some even climbed the wall and began to topple it. The Iron Curtain had fallen, and a year later, Germany would be reunited.
Awesome,
Elections
man.
in Bulgaria, a peaceful revolution in Czechoslovakia, and a violent one in Romania brought to an end communist authority in the Eastern Bloc. America decided it would be best if it just stayed away and let the change happen, as the anti-communist movement continued all the way back to Moscow. Gorbachev had given the people the freedom to demonstrate, Now, they demonstrated for an end to the communist single-party rule, and Gorbachev had to give in. For the first time in history, elections were held in which candidates not officially endorsed by the party were allowed to run. Ambitious rival of Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, led a growing democratic movement. Now things here get quite confusing, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union is a complicated topic, so believe me, this is oversimplified, but it went a little bit like this. The Soviet Union was made up of a number of smaller Soviet republics, the largest of which was Russia. Yeltsin got himself elected the president of Russia, and began a struggle for sovereignty against Gorbachev and the greater Soviet Union. Communist hardliners were horrified at what Gorbachev was allowing, so they briefly kidnapped him and tried to set up their own emergency government. But Yeltsin and his supporters all gathered around the White House in Moscow and were like, no, we have a tank. So the hardliners had to concede and released Gorbachev. Wow, thanks Boris. That was a close one. No problem. And thanks to you for all the great freedom you've given us. Anytime, pal. And just to inform you, I've used that freedom you've given us to go behind your back and make a deal with Ukraine and Belarus to dissolve the Soviet Union and set up the Russian Federation. In other words, you're no longer in charge.
Wow.
Dude.
Mugged off, man.
So uncool. And so decades of tension and the everlasting threat of nuclear war finally came to an end as democratic governments were established in many of the old Soviet republics, and the world got along together forever after. Right, guys?
Yeah, let's not say got along together, but it's better than what it was.
Hey, this modern art thing is growing on me. Where can I learn to do that? Skillshare.
Alright, we've got a new ad there, guys. If you want to check that Skillshare ad out, check the video out. The link will be in the description. Wow, I honestly did not know much about the Cold War at all, how actually close it was to potential World War III. And I didn't realise how the Soviet Union basically turned into the Russian Federation. It's awesome to see the revolutions as well throughout the whole of Europe, really, with Germany. Obviously, I knew about the Berlin Wall. I knew there was a divide at some point in history. Again, my history knowledge is... it's not the best, guys. I didn't pay too much attention in school, or at least if I did, they didn't go in too much detail on that subject. I was more my sports person. I love my maths and stuff like that. But wow, I really enjoyed this video, guys. Let me know if you want me to check anything else out from OverSimplified. I definitely will do. If you don't like them, let me know in the comments. I know not everyone likes OverSimplified, so I won't be doing them every single day, guys. But if you guys have hit that like goal, you will be seeing this 24 hours after the first one. I really appreciate you guys checking out the videos as well. You're absolute legends. Hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. Hit that like button. I'd seriously appreciate it. Let's try and hit, if we hit 200 on that first one, let's try and hit 250 on this one. Nothing to do if we don't. And have a fantastic day. Peace.